warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to keep this first segment relatively short. Now, we did see some nice moves from Missouri, so I'll give a little bit of a shout out there. And those moves happened after we did this interview with our good friend Riley Frain. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. Going to be talking about a wide variety of things with him. We saw the transfer portal opening date be a little bit later this year than in the past. We're going to chat with him about how much of an advantage that has been for our year number 1 coaches, what has all been involved with that. And we're also going to be highlighting some of the teams in the Northeast part of the country that have had some great moves. I know that we are particularly going to be talking about Providence, the great offseason that they've been having. He's a mid-major guy. There hasn't been a ton of rambunctious teams from the mid-major ranks that have really gotten it going here in the transfer portal, but there are a few that have been spending that money. We're going to be highlighting those teams and so much more. And then in the final segment, I'm going to recap all the transfer news that we saw in college basketball on Thursday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, I have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg and plead of you, if you do have those Twitter/X questions, fire those in, because we're still like 197 or so days away from the start of the college basketball season. And you're noticing these first segments are getting relatively short. When we do have a big piece of news that drops, I always try to put it here like Marquette actually utilizing the transfer portal was what we led with yesterday. Didn't necessarily get that on Friday, and when you have things like this, I just keep the intro relatively short. I try to put in there 2 ad breaks because that makes the sponsors happy and everything like that, but that said, you can just expect every single day to have things all rounded up. We're going to continue to get you guys great guests, and coming up next, we have one of those in Riley Frain right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be joined by this man as Riley Frain. He is doing such an amazing job looking at this great sport of college basketball. He's over there at a few amazing platforms. He is one of the main men over at the Portal Report, does great work over at Mid-Major Madness, as well as I know that he is based out there in the lovely state of New York, and he's an alumni of the St. Joe's Hawks, so we get a lot of A10 coverage and so much more out of him. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at easy enough, his first and last name, Riley Frain. That last name is spelled Frain. And Riley, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you for having me, man. It's always great to be here. It feels like a while since we last talked, but certainly a lot's happened in the last couple of days with everything crazy, the portal chaos of the start of the offseason here. So excited to dive into it, talk about it all. You touched on all my coverage there, but, I'm sure we'll get to talking about, a ton of exciting things today between the portal, a lot of mid-major additions, high-major additions, and, everywhere in between.
Absolutely. We're doing this before we know the pickups from Thursday, but through a week and a half, and it's only been a week and a half. It feels like it's been more like 5 years with all the pickups that we've had. What have you made out of the portal process thus far? Because I did think that with what we saw this past season, with Michigan being able to win the title, Arizona, all their success, that teams would certainly be wanting to sign big men right away, that they'd be paying the big men quite a bit of money. And that, from everything I have seen, has very, very much been the case. And it feels like even bigger emphasis than it has been in past years.
This sort of being my second year coming on the show here to talk transfer portal related stuff feels like all the same themes as kind of last year that we saw in the portal, just to, an even more significant degree. We've had even larger number, a record number of players enter the transfer portal just at the Division I level alone, let alone everything that's happening between D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO, whatever it may be. You mentioned the price tag that there's been on size in the transfer portal. Of course, that was an emphasis last year. It seems like it's only become more of an emphasis last year with a lot of players going off the board. The big talking point that's been, sort of touched on with Michigan winning the national championship was their success in the transfer portal and how maybe you can go about buying national championships nowadays and how it's all played out. And I think sort of the last big talking point, that's really popped its way up has been there's probably a huge, obviously we don't have a lot of the financial figures released yet, but it seems to be there's a huge degree of increase in percentage of amounts that players are asking for in terms of their NIL contracts. I saw Evan Mia put that number at around 60%. I saw other sources about a week ago putting it maybe 30 or 40%. Whatever it may be, those are pretty large numbers in terms of financial increases that these schools are going to have to pay out. So, it only makes, maybe it makes it a little bit easier for these high majors to go out and buy guys, a little bit tougher for mid majors to compete. It sort of just all plays into the chaos of this portal era. So those are definitely some of the bigger headlines that I've sort of noticed over this last week and a half outside of all the different commitments we've had over the past couple of weeks and everything like that. It's been a chaotic time. It seems like sort of how everything played out last year, we're just seeing it continue to snowball and steamroll down a hill here in terms of everything that's gone on around the transfer portal.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. We have been seeing things happening hot and heavy. And how much do you think that there are teams that more and more they're looking at things and they realize, hey, we can dive into the portal? Because something I thought was interesting on Wednesday, thank goodness gracious, Marquette signed somebody, Sandra Frew coming out over there. And that's a good pickup for them, by the way. I really like that one. But how much do you think teams are going just further into the portal than they have in the past? Because it feels like some of these teams that they were a little bit hesitant to do so because Marquette, for the longest time, they refused to sign anyone. They dove in, and a school like a Michigan State has yet to sign a guy. But even last offseason, they were getting a little bit more into it. And it just feels like it's a sign of the times when you do see these last holdouts being like, nope, we concede.
Yeah, even if you take a step further than that, just sort of traditional schools that you don't maybe see putting a ton of money toward basketball, maybe being a little more willing to put money toward basketball in the portal era, I think has been interesting. I think of a team like Miami with new head coach Jay Lucas and them being able to sign a Caden Lewis, I believe, yesterday. And obviously they signed Cyril from Georgia a few days before that. And, they had some success with the work he was able to do in the transfer portal this past year. I know, obviously, a program that's probably looking to compete for ACC championships, but made an NCAA tournament appearance this past year, didn't play too badly in the tournament. I think of a team like Indiana and the success they were able to find on the football side and how maybe they're looking at the transfer portal as a way to help build the basketball. They already have 6 incoming signings, if I'm not mistaken. I think they added 2 today on top of 4 that they already had. I believe they added Bryce Lindsey from Villanova and Marcus Burton from Notre Dame on top of an already star-loaded 4-man transfer class here. So behind Darren DeVries, and I don't have their record off the top of my head front of mind, but I don't necessarily think they were one of the more competitive teams in the Big Ten this past season. I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at sort of the success of football and saying, hey, maybe we can push money toward the transfer portal and, buy our way into some conference championships and, compete for more bids to the NCAA tournament. I mentioned maybe some less traditional teams sort of diving into the portal. Houston, that's sort of traditionally been built on homegrown talent. Now, that's not to say, they haven't made splashes in the portal in the past, but just in my opinion, really going after some bigger names this year, which is, maybe a little atypical of Coach Kelvin Sampson, bringing in a guy like Delreco Gillespie from Kent State, one of the foremost mid-major stars in the country this past year, in my opinion. And alongside that, bringing in a guy like Deaton Thomas Jr., a high major talent who has found success at the high major levels, who's solid in the SEC, who's a proven contributor at this level, and, no doubt will be able to transition to Houston. And of course, just back to my initial point, Houston, not a team sort of built on homegrown talent for the most part in this Kelvin Sampson era and not necessarily shying away from diving into the portal. So just back to your initial point, Greg, I don't necessarily know if pinpoint on, a whole bunch of teams that I'm saying, hey, like they haven't, other than obviously you mentioned Marquette, but not a whole bunch of teams out there who I can say, hey, they haven't, dipped their toe into the portal in this era of college basketball, but certainly a lot of teams out there this year that I feel like if you look up and down the ranks, you're saying, hey, they already have 2 or 3 signings and are bringing in a couple visits already. And you can sort of see the money starting to maybe be pushed into some of these transfer portal signings a little more for schools who are, interested in going that way.
Absolutely. And here's something else I've been noticing as Riley Frain, who does such great work over at the Portal Report, has joined me on Coast to Coast Hoops. But we know that with the date to enter into the transfer portal, that was pretty much just immediately once the national title game wrapped up. How much do you think that this helps out the first year coaches? Because with the coaching hiring cycle, I felt like these coaches were at a big giant disadvantage with trying to hit the transfer portal so early. But it does feel like some of these schools like South Florida with Chris Mack, I think is a really nice example that they've been able to hit the ground running. Kansas State with Casey Alexander have added a lot of guys. Cincinnati has been doing a good job in the portal. I feel like the first year guys have really benefited the most from the changes that we've seen in the transfer portal opening date this offseason.
For sure, yeah. I mean, Providence, another one I think you missed on there, but
Absolutely.
I've been hitting guys left and right. I signed a grad transfer from Yale, Samson Alateen. A handful of newcoming not necessarily newcomer coaches, but coaches in new positions, absolutely killing it in the portal. I touched on a handful there, but definitely think the transfer portal window, being pushed back has been helpful. Now I'm a little skeptical because I feel like to that point we saw a lot of guys who, quote unquote, announced their intentions to enter before the portal was officially opened, and a lot of coaches who maybe weren't participating in postseason play were sort of taking advantage of that and maybe not shying away from reaching out to guys. And I don't know necessarily with respect to the rules of tampering and how that might equate to it and whatnot. I think it's necessarily tough to define that in today's era of the transfer portal and whatnot. But it still is unique because, again, you can't enter your name officially until after that Final Four weekend. Again, a lot of guys who were sort of poking their heads into the portal early, who I'm sure are receiving interest from guys. Of course, the unique thing about grad transfers is they can enter the portal, pretty much as soon as their season ends and search, a team for next year. So you had guys like Tyler Luntblade out of Belmont committing to Tennessee while the tournament was still going on, albeit pretty late into the process. So it's still a little bit of a confusing situation. I'm sure there's still going to be some refining of the rules from the NCAA. I wouldn't be disappointed personally if they even pushed it back a little bit further just to give other guys more time. Because, there's still, for the most part, at the mid-major level, teams more so I cover, there's definitely still some coaching hirings going on around the country. But yeah, I definitely think this was a good first step in the process. We're seeing a lot more of those first-year coaches who are able to compete for some solid talent. Of course, Brian Hodgson again comes to mind with some of the moves they made the past couple of days. So yes, just to your point, Greg, I think it's been a big help. I don't necessarily think I'd be disappointed to see it maybe pushed back a little more, some further refining of sort of the rule and everything that's going around the transfer portal. I think we definitely need a lot of that overall. Definitely a really exciting time for a lot of new coming coaches around Division I basketball.
I agree. And Riley, I know that you do a great job over at Mid-Major Madness. We've highlighted some of the bigger schools that have had a nice offseason. Who are some of the mid-majors that you look at? Because the mid-majors, they aren't going to be signing these guys like a Flory Badunga or anything like that. They're not going to be getting those sorts of pickups, but I still feel like there are some teams out there that are doing a nice job. Maybe they're basketball-only schools like High Point and VCU obviously come to mind, but are there just a few mid-major teams that are right now popping up that you're really liking the offseason that they've had thus far?
Still the first two right out from under me. I mean, High Point has been absolutely killing it under Flynn Clayman and with everything they were able to do in the NCAA tournament to close out the season.
Not sure who had some money over there at High Point, but they are spending.
No, believe me. I mean, I've never been to the campus personally, but I just know from talking to people and having maybe known one or two people by association who went to school there's a good bit of money rolling around High Point. It's a beautiful campus from what I understand. They've done a great job in the transfer portal this offseason. I think that the preeminent signing for me so far this year for them has been Jason Rivera-Torres coming over from Monmouth, just sort of a do-it-all 6'7" wing, scoring, rebounding, playmaking, defending. No surprise that he sort of entered the transfer portal, and he had some high major interests, but I think High Point obviously has a little bit of money to offer and was able to get him over. So excited to see him there. They also brought in CJ Brown from South Florida and Raquan Sherman over from Kennesaw State, all regarded pretty highly in the transfer portal rankings. And from what I understand, High Point probably not done because they've already had a couple other guys visiting on campus and announce interests. So I'm sure we'll see plenty more from them. You mentioned VCU too. They've been absolutely killing it. A big signing from Tennessee State today, whose name I'm mistakenly blanking on. But just even outside of that, they've already done a good job bringing guys in. And not only that, but retaining talent, which I think has been really exciting. And maybe just another team I'll point out, sort of sticking to that North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland area theme, has been the Charlotte 49ers. For those who maybe weren't familiar, they actually hired Wes Miller. They've already been able to bring over some guys from Cincinnati and Jizzle James, who has had a little bit of success at the high major level, was a very highly respected prospect, taking a step down to the mid mid-major level. They've already had a handful of guys who were out on visits recently, with high major experience. So, I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to sort of recruit decently, bring in a handful of exciting transfer portal guys this year. Jizzle James being the only signing, officially reported signing at the moment by Coach Miller and that new staff. But I just think an exciting head coach. They've had a handful of guys who have committed to visits already. It's an exciting place to be in the American Conference, an exciting location as well to that point. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're, bringing a handful of guys this offseason that, are helping to turn that program into a competitor in the American. And maybe the last team I'll touch on, just thinking a little more A-10 specific. Been impressed by Loyola Chicago and what they've been able to do. The big signing so far being Dan Nessa. But they also added an interesting 6'10", 6'11" forward and Jason Schofield over from Marist in the MAC, who I've covered pretty thoroughly. And, I think he'll be a decent contributor in the A-10. And after a down year for Loyola Chicago, single-digit wins in conference and an early bow out in the conference tournament under Drew Valentine, just excited to see them getting some interesting talent in. And if I'm not mistaken, they made a D2 signing too. That's escaping me. One of the premier D2 guard scores, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm blanking on a name. Just been impressed by the way they've been able to recruit the portal early, getting some early interest and visits from guys. A little bit A-10 specific there, but a handful of mid-majors sort of on the East Coast outside of Loyola Chicago again that I've been impressed by. Sort of the High Point VCU you mentioned. Again, excited about Charlotte with their new head coach and some of the early interest and offers they've been able to get. And then Loyola Chicago and maybe some of the early work they've been doing in the transfer portal I've been impressed by as well.
No doubt about it. It's going to be a very interesting offseason. We are less than 10 days into it as of right now, and we've got about 200 more to go. So, Riley, you've got a lot of work to do this offseason. I know that you're going to be reacting, and you're trying your best to keep your head on a swivel because we've had 100 billion guys enter the transfer portal, and we've had a few of those guys already signed. We've got over 1,000 guys still remaining in the portal, so we are going to be both very, very hard at work. So, love to give people at home know it's all tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure getting to talk some portal with you, whether it be now or mid-season when we get into mid-major and some maybe local East Coast stuff and whatever it may be. So thank you for always having me on. For those listening at home, you can find my coverage on social media, as Greg mentioned at the top of the interview, at Riley Frain for the most part, RILEYFRAIN. A lot of transfer portal specific stuff going on right now, men's and women's basketball. But, as the season goes on, I do a bunch of mid-major sort of focused men's and women's coverage, as Greg mentioned. And so really, if you're into anything college basketball, definitely come stop by and check it out. Yeah, just again, thank you for having me, Greg. I look forward to hopefully hopping back on here in the next couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more. I mean, if I hopped on again tomorrow, I'm sure we'd have plenty more to talk about. So, hopefully we'll get on the show again in the next couple of weeks and have plenty more to talk about.
Heck, if you hopped on like 3 hours later, we would have a lot to talk about because that's the way that's going right now in college basketball. Riley, he is very hard at work. He's doing an amazing job looking at what we're all getting in the sport of college basketball. So always appreciate him. A big thanks to Riley for joining me on Cusco Soups, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Riley Frain. Does such great work over there at Mid-Major Madness, does great work over at the Portal Report, and so much more. I know that he's very hard at work taking a look at all that we're getting in college basketball right now, so a big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of the news and notes that we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Akron was able to get on the board with a few transfers as they're very much going to be looking to be able to add to the backcourt. They already added Max Burton from Western Michigan, but now they're getting in Taj Tavetsky, who is a very nice guard over at Carter Word this last season, and Xavier Wilson, a guy that was over at Kansas State last season. He redshirted, was not really able to get out there on the floor, but a guy that could be a nice little upside guy. The main guy here is Tavetsky, though. Last season, he was able to put in there some really nice numbers over at Incarnate Word. He actually began his career over at Cleveland State, so he's familiar with the Midwest. When he was at Cleveland State 2 years ago, 12.5 points on 36% three-point shooting. Really took it to the next level this past season. 4 boards, 4 assists, steal per contest at Incarnate Word, 17.5 points, shot 37.5% from three-point range. As we know with Akron, they lose John Gross in the offseason, so they're in a little bit of transition. I think that this is going to be able to help them out quite a bit, so I thought that was a nice pickup. And speaking of former Incarnate Word players, Jordan Pike, he was over at Incarnate Word this last season, and he has decided that he is going to be heading to Arkansas State. Lane Taylor of Murray State is going to as well for the Lane train, and Lane Taylor, he last season was able to have himself a relatively nice season. giving the team about 8 points, 3.2 assists per contest. That led the team, and he was a starter that was able to shoot about 34.5% from three-point range, so that's going to be a help out in the backcourt. For Pike, he's a 6'7", little bit of a gadget guy that was able to shoot 40% for three. Now, the Incarnate Word defense was very, very lackluster, but he was able to put in there 12.5 points per game. Incarnate Word was a slower tempo team. Arkansas State is going to be looking to push a little bit of tempo, but I do think that he's going to be able to be a relatively solid fit in this style, and I do like this pickup for them, so I think that is another one that is going to be solid. And for Ball State, after they had such a rough go of it last season, picking up Javion Guy King to go along with the fact that they already had Trey Lewis, a 40% three-point shooter, and Jalile Parker and Aaron Fine, the freshman / walk-on over at Purdue. I think that this is good for them. For Guy King last season, part of a very resurgent Central Arkansas team, was able to put in there 10 points, 4 boards from three-point range, shot in that neighborhood about 34% from three. So I think that he's really going to be able to add some pop there. And speaking of adding a little bit of pop, for Baylor, they pick up Caden Mingo. He was able to be a relatively rock-solid freshman over at Penn State. Now, the Penn State defense was not necessarily great, to say the least, but for Mingo, 13.5 points, 4.3 assists per game. They already added a really good three-point shooter in Brett Decker, as Mingo, he really did not shoot a ball from three-point range whatsoever, but he's going to be able to do a nice job being able to dole out the ball. I think that is a relatively solid pickup for them, so that's one that I think is going to be able to help them out. For Xavier, they pick up another pair of transfers. They already brought in Michael Nwoko, True Washington, Ruben Dominguez. Now they get Roland Zalajibi and Chance Westery. Westery is really the main guy that you're looking for. He's a former top 100 recruiter, couldn't really find his footing over at Auburn or Syracuse. This last year at Auburn, 15.5 points, 5.5 assists per game. One of the best teams in terms of not turning the ball over for UAB as well. Shot only 24% from three. He's not going to give you a lot from the outside, but that's why he signed the likes over Ruben Dominguez. And then Roland Zalajibi, 9.5 points, 7.5 rebounds per game over at Southern Illinois. Was able to shoot about 35% from three at 6'9". I fully expect him to be a little bit more of a depth piece, but regardless, Xavier really doing a nice job in terms of filling out that roster. Season number 2 under Mr. Patino. It looks like things are going to be on the up and up there, so I really like some of the moves that they're making. For Washington State, they're making some moves as well as Sebastian Atkins. He last season was over at Wake Forest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Washington State. For Atkins last season, about 5.5 points per contest. He was beginning his career over at Denver. At Denver, he was a very solid player, giving that team about 12.5 points, right around about 2.5 assists per contest, and for Wake Forest, about 2 assists per game as well, so saw some relatively solid minutes. He's going to be teaming up with a guy in Frazier Knight at the Roxborough that 2 years ago shot it really well from three. Ronnie Harrison was a nice go-to scorer last season over at East Texas A&M, so like the upside that you got there. I have no idea how this guy has eligibility, by the way. The man of Steel, Steel Ventures, is back in the state of Washington. He missed like 2 seasons due to injury. For Steel Ventures, his first year of college basketball was 2019-20. That was a redshirt year, but he has been in college basketball since pre-COVID. Like, I have no idea how he's committing right now to Washington, but hey, last year at Gonzaga, bit disappointing, 5 points per game on 36% three-point shooting after he missed the last 2 seasons, but hey, Steel Ventures has eligibility. You learn something new every day, so that's good, clean family fun right there. Spencer Elliott was last season over at Charlotte. He has decided that he is going to be going to UNC Wilmington. Wilmington last year absolutely killed it in the transfer portal. For Elliott, he wasn't necessarily like the biggest guy for Charlotte. He was a part-time starter that gave the team about 4 points per contest, a little bit more of a defensive stopper at 6'9". He's going to be able to pull in there a few rebounds. For Wilmington, they're going to be losing quite a bit of that roster from last season, but I think his versatility is going to be all about because he was able to pop a few threes, only shot about 26% or so from three-point range, but still, he should be able to add some nice defensive pop for the team, so I do like that. And for Georgia, they are finally on the board. They were without a transfer for quite a while, and they had Freddie De Leon. He last season was over at Penn State, supplied for the team about 14 points, 2 assists per contest, has familiarity with the SEC, began his career over at Tennessee, only about a 32% three-point shooter, but was able to generate a little bit over a steal per contest at 6'5". He's got good active hands. I think that he's going to be a nice fit for Georgia. Now, Georgia probably going to want to improve their three-point shooting from a season ago, but this one I think is a solid one. I think that that's a nice, shall we say, fit with the system there. Marco Jackson, I was surprised that he didn't see more minutes when he was over at Kansas, a former top 25 recruit this past year, 4.8 points per contest, did shoot about 37% from three-point range, solid defender. He's going on over to Georgetown, and Georgetown, they haven't added a lot of guys, but adding he along Jalen Lowe, who 2 seasons ago over at Pittsburgh was a very rock-solid guard. I think that they've done a great job there. Going to need to add a little bit more size, but still, their offense and running. They're off to a nice start here in the offseason. Grand Canyon is as well. They're added Jaden Zimmerman and Omaha Bailu, and now they're going to be having Blake Barkley, who last season was over at East Tennessee State, into the fold, 14.5 points, 6 boards, shot 38.5% from three-point range. Great versatility at about 6'7". I do think that he's going to be able to do a nice job, give this team a little bit more three-point shooting pop than what they had a season ago, so he's going to be able to give them some good versatility. So that's a good place to be able to just find some nice production there. He's probably going to be a little bit of an ancillary piece for the team, but still, I think that was a nice add. For Gardner Webb, they just need a little bit of everything. Samuel Osai Nokashire, hopefully I got that correct. He was over at Quinnipiac, really didn't get out there on the floor, a point, a rebound per game, but probably better than what Gardner had this past year, considering they lost to North Greenville on their home floor. That's a Division II school, so that was a little bit rough, but hey, they're on the board with a transfer, so yay, verily there. For Furman, they were already able to add Marcus Kellenase, a double-figure score over at Western Carolina this last season, and now they add in their Luka Tuz, like the only guy for Boston College that was able to shoot it from three this last season, and he was averaging for Boston College right around about 6 points, 2.5 assists, shot 39% from three. Boston College was a pretty rock-solid defensive team. Luka Tuz has a little bit that he needs to improve upon there, but I think that for Furman, he can go out there, be able to give them some good production. I really like this ad for them, so that was a good one. For Florida State, they added a pair of guys. They've already got Sean Abave, a former top 50 recruit of Cincinnati, coming in. Now that they add in their Cam Taylor, he last season over at UNC Asheville, nice go-to score, 19 points, 5 boards, 3 assists. Now he only shot about 28% from three, but I think that Florida State under Luke Locks, they realized that, hey, maybe we don't need to have every single shot be a three-point shot. They really changed around their style a little bit, so I do think that he's going to be able to fit more of that new style for them. And then they add in there Anthony Robinson. He this last season was playing over at Missouri, and while he was over at Missouri, he was able to have some relatively good production, 9 points, 3 boards, 3 assists. Again, not an amazing three-point shooter at 31.5%, so you can tell that the, shall we say, blueprint that Luke Locks had to begin with, he's been willing to change that up a little bit, and I do think that's all for the better. For Florida Atlantic, they were already bringing in Jelani Hamilton from Georgia State. Now they add in there a pair of guys. Josh Harris, he was over at Indiana, really didn't see a lot of minutes, and then Braden Speed, he's more of the guy that was a producer. Last season, he was over at Loyola Maryland, 15 points per contest, shot 36.5% from 3-point, 4.5 boards, 4 assists per contest for a team that, they played okay defense. It's not necessarily amazing or anything like that, but I think that he's going to be able to be a good fit for Loyola Maryland. They played a little bit more up-tempo last season than they have in the past, so I think that that's a nice little bit of an upside get. And then for Josh Harris, this is someone that just was unable to get out there on the floor last season over at Indiana. 2 years ago over at North Florida, 13.5 points, 7 boards, shot about 33% from three as a 6'8", little bit of a combo player, has familiarity with the state. I think that that's a solid pickup. He was able to go through a year of practices, what have you, with the Indiana program, so I do think that he's going to be able to come in there right away, give you quite a bit of something. I think that this man is going to be able to deliver quite a bit of something as well. BJ Ward, last season he was playing over at Southeast Louisiana, and he was a nice edgy sufferer, 35% three-point shooter, 3.5 assists, 11 points per game for a Southeast Louisiana team that was always very solid on the glass. He goes on over to ETSU, East Tennessee State. For East Tennessee State, he very much fits the mold of what they're looking for there. I really think that this is going to be a good situational fit. Maybe he's not going to be able to average like 15 plus points per contest, but it's a whole is greater than some of its parts approach with ETSU. I think that he's going to fit very well there. How about DePaul and the way that they've been picking up guys? You've got Adi Papula. Hopefully I got that correct. He was averaging about 11 points per game over at Tulsa this last year, shot 41% from three, but really came on strong towards the back half of the season. In conference play, was shooting about 42% from three, 11 points per contest. He is one of the many, many guys heading on over to DePaul. They've already got Magoon Gwath coming in. Kamari Holmes was a 19 point per game scorer over at Wofford. Noah Mewson, he saw some nice production over at Arizona State. Wilson Jaquez was solid down low for Fresno State, so a lot of really good gets there. I love what they are doing here, and for Creighton, they've been able to do a nice job adding some guys. BJ Davis, Wasinas, Oswin, can't pronounce the last name, and now they're bringing Caden Edwards. He was playing over at TCU this last season, and he wasn't necessarily like a game breaker for them or anything like that, but he's a former top 100 recruit that averaged about 3.5 points, shot 43.5% from 3-point. I think that he's going to be able to fit this Allen Huss style. He comes over from High Points. I think that that's going to be a good fit for them, so I love that one. And then you've got Travis Perry. He last season was playing over at Ole Miss, and now he's going to be going to Dayton. This is a nice gift for Dayton. He was averaging about 5.5 points per game, began his career at Kentucky, a top 100 recruit when he came out of high school, shot about 35.5% from 3-point range. He's going to be a little bit more of a one-trick pony sort of guy, not necessarily much of a facilitator, anything like that, but he's a really nice 3-point shooter that I think is going to be able to give this team some nice pop after after last year they were a little bit uncharacteristically down with their three-point shooting. That should be able to help restore the roar a little bit. Jackson Keith, he last season was over at Butler. He was averaging about 2 points, 2 boards. Really didn't see a lot of time as a 6'5", little bit of a combo player, but Davidson picks him up with losing the likes of Robert Blums and company. They really did need to add a little bit more depth. I think that this is going to be able to very much help them be able to do so. So I thought that that was a nice pickup. Now this is a really good one for UConn. Najai Hines, he last season was over at Seton Hall, was able to do an incredible job down low for them. 6.5 points, 5.5 boards, shot about 60% from the floor. Seton Hall, one of the better defensive teams in all of college basketball. 2.2 blocks per contest. As we know, Alex Caravan and a few others for UConn going to be gone from last season, so they needed to restore sort of that pop that they had down low. This is going to be a very good way of doing so. I love this pickup for them. I think that this is going to be a great fit in general, so love what they're doing there. And then how about Boston College? We are noticing that the son of Bill Murray is really getting going here in the transfer portal. They've now got 3 guys coming in. J.B. Frankel, he was over at Northeastern this last season. Ernest Shelton from Merrimack, along with one of the best names in all of college basketball, Money Williams, who he was over at Montana last year. 20.5 points, 4.7 assists, shot 34% from three-point range, shoots over 85% at the free throw line, throws in their steal per contest. I think that he's going to be able to go out there, tear it up, and it's very clear that Boston College is going to be looking to play a little bit more defensive pressure. Now, I don't know what you're going to be able to get out of J.B. Frankel this season. He last season was over at Northeastern, averaging only about 6 points, 2 assists per contest. He's probably not a guy that got a bag in NIL or anything like that. A little bit more of a walk-on, but Ernest Shelton, he was rock solid over at Merrimack this last season. 16 points, shot 34.9% from 3 for one of the best teams in terms of generating turnovers in all of college basketball. I really like what Luke Murray is doing right now, so absolutely love those moves. And then Juan Cranford, he was very rock solid over at Eastern Kentucky this last season. 12 points per contest. He, from three-point, which was able to shoot 36% from 3. Bowling Green was a little bit hit or miss from the outside. He's added now to the Bowling Green roster. With Bowling Green, when they are at full force, they're a team that is going to be looking to push a little bit more tempo. They're going to be looking to play a little bit more fast in that Todd Simon style. I think that he fits very well with that, so I love that move. And then Jonquarius Stanback, he was playing down low for Alabama State this last season at 6'10", averaged about 8.5 points, pair of blocks per contest. Not a guy that's going to light the world on fire offensively. He gets added to Boise State. For Boise State, they were a little bit lackluster on defense. I think that he's going to be able to do a pretty solid job in helping them restore a little bit more of that roar. Do I think he's going to be anything like super duper amazing? No, but at the same time, I do think that he could be a nice little bit of a depth piece for them, and we'll see what they're able to do moving forward with that. Zach Davidson, he last season was over at Northern Arizona, 14 points per contest, got injured mid-season when he was a really main scorer for this guy. Not necessarily going to pop it from three-point range much at 6'8", but that said, he has decided that he's going to be going to Hawaii, where with Hawaii, they're not necessarily a team that's going to be priding themselves on three-point shooting or anything like that. He's a guy that I think can very much fit the system. For Northern Arizona, they weren't necessarily a great defensive team, but it was much worse when Davidson was out of the fold. So I do think that he's going to be able to fit that Oran Ganot style. And then you've got Max Frazier. He last season was playing over at Central Connecticut. 12 points, 7 boards per contest. Guy that's able to do quite a few different things down low, give you about 1.7 blocks per contest. He has decided that he's going to be going to Hampton. Now, Hampton, not a team that necessarily shot it well from 3, so they're going to need to add a little bit more around the outside because that's been a bit lackluster for them. But that said, I do think that he's going to be able to go out there and he's going to be able to fit their mold of being able to play really good, shall we say, low post defense, being able to block a few shots, grab some second and third chances. So that's good to be able to help them out moving forward. We already mentioned all the moves of the High Point Panthers. They do add C.J. Brown as well from South Florida, was able to be pretty rock solid out there in the backcourt. So do like that move for them. And then I like this one as well, as you've got Demarion Birch, who was last season a very nice piece over at Bradley. He was averaging about 9 points per contest, only shot about 31.5% for 3. You look at the previous year, and he was shooting an absolutely ridiculous 56% for 3. You knew that that was not sustainable, but a guy with relatively active hands, he has decided that he is going to be going to Illinois State. Think that that's going to be a great fit for them, as he's going to be staying within the state, and I do think that he's going to be able to provide quite a bit of pop for them moving forward, and I do think that he's just an overall good fit for this team, so that's one that I really applaud, and I do like that move as well. For Loyola Chicago, they've been very active in the portal since we talked with Riley Frain. They pick up another guy. They already had Desai guy along with Eddie Ricks, Jason Schofield in the fold. Now they bring in the Hand, Donald Hand, one of the main guys for Boston College with regards to scoring. Not a guy that's really going to give you a lot from three-point range. This last year shot 22% from three-point range. We'll say previous year shot more like 38% from three-point range, but still was a guy that was able to supply the team with about 12.5 points, 4 boards, a little bit of a do-it-all guy at 6'5" for Loyola Chicago. It's very clear that they need to revamp. Maybe they were bringing in the wrong guys 8 seasons ago, so they are looking to be able to turn over a little bit of a new leaf. I do like this pickup for them, and I think that that's a good starting spot for them moving forward. And then for UTEP, they were able to pick up a few guys as well. Reese Miller, he was over at William & Mary this last season, and then you've got Augusto Casilla, who was over at Ole Miss this last season. Just really didn't see a lot of minutes for them. He was only averaging about 2.5 points per contest, but at 6'8", he should be able to give some relatively good size there for a UTEP team that just year in and year out, they've really struggled on the glass, so I think that he's going to be able to help out on that front. And then for Reese Miller, coming on over from William & Mary, I do think that this is a solid fit. He was able to average for that team 12 points, shot about 33% from three-point range, and a whole is greater than some of its parts sort of team. It was a team that did a nice job generating some turnovers, guarding the three-point line, so I overall do think that that's a solid move for them, and I do like what they're going to be able to do moving forward, so we'll see what else UTEP has up their sleeve. Last year, they didn't hit the portal too much, probably going to need to hit it a little bit more, and so far so good. Joshua Legree, he has decided that he's going to be going to the Meep UTSA Roadrunners. I like Austin Clonch as a coach. I don't know if this is necessarily the world's greatest fit. He was averaging about 7.5 points, 3.3 assists per contest, shot 37% from three-point range. The Austin Clonch style is generating a lot of turnovers. He doesn't necessarily do a whole heck of a lot of that. He was on a more, I'd say, team that doesn't necessarily play the best perimeter defense, so they're going to probably need to be adding a few more active hands with regards to this team, so we'll see what they're going to be able to do moving forward with that. So a little bit of a jury's out situation there for RJ Greer. He last season was playing over at Davidson, and he has decided that he is going to be heading on over to UNC Greensboro. Averaged about 3.5 points, did shoot 43% from three-point range. Greensboro was a little bit down with that three-point shooting this past season. I do think that an ad like this is very good for that overall style, and I like what they're going to be able to bring to the table. St. Louis did not lose a lot from last season, but they do lose one guy in Brady Dunlap, who I feel like in another situation he would be getting more minutes. And UC Santa Barbara, they're moving to the WCC. They make a nice splash. They do bring in Dunlap. He actually began his career over at St. John's, and this past season while he was over at St. Louis, he was a solid, shall we say, come off the bench microwave score. 7 points per game, shot 45% from three. Now, Santa Barbara was not the same team defensively this last season that they have been in the past. I do think that with St. Louis being actually a very rock-solid defense, that he's going to be able to help out in that regard a little bit. This is just a good all-around fit, so I love this one. And for Texas Tech, it looks like they're going to cruise through the transfer portal. Cruz Davis, he was over at Hofstra this last year, 20 points, 4.5 assists, shot 40% from three. He goes on over to Texas Tech. This is just a great get in general for Grant McCaslin. We saw what this guy was able to do in step-up games. This is a guy that could be a really nice go-to scorer. So for Texas Tech, they get it right with their first ad in the transfer portal. For UC San Diego, they do as well. Cade Dodson, he this last season was playing over at Loyola Chicago, and while he was over at Loyola Chicago, was able to give that team 38% three-point shooting, 10.5 points. He was one of the lone bright spots for the team. He, I think, is going to do a solid job for UC San Diego. Now, for UC San Diego, they're playing a little bit of a different style than they did under Eric Olin. Under Eric Olin, they had active hands. They did a great job in terms of generating turnovers, not so much as last season. And when it came to Loyola Chicago, they generated no turnovers whatsoever. So you will certainly be able to fit that system. So I do think that that's a good pickup for them. And then you've got Tennessee Tech, who's really gone out there and added quite a few guys as they are now under the tutelage of Tobovian Anderson. You may recall he was the Fairleigh Dickinson coach. They had already added in there Trent Mascara, Deontay Green, Caleb Hollenbeck, and now they've got Devontae Hackett along Caleb Sanders, who are going to be added in there as well. For Sanders, he this last season was playing over at South Florida, and he really didn't see big-time minutes for them, only about 3 points per contest, but a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player that's able to pop it from three. I think that he fits really well in general with that system, and for Hackett, he was really pushed out of necessity into playing a few more minutes than expected over at Sonel. 13.5 points, shot 34.5% from three-point, surged towards back half of the season. 21 plus points in 4 of the last 5 games. I think that he's really took a nice stride forward forward towards back half of the season last year. So I think that is a really good pickup for them. And then you've got for Texas A&M a pair of pickups now. I think that this is a very small one. Lucas Wells, he was over at Radford this last season. Averaged 8 points per game, but he did shoot 45.5% from three. I do need to throw that in there, but he heads on over to Texas A&M. For Texas A&M, they're a team that's very much built on depth. They've already got PJ Haggerty. Have to think that he's a coming off the bench for like 5 minutes, pop a few threes sort of guy, and then they bring in Cade Phillips. I think that this is a little bit more of a glue guy sort of ad, which they probably need. Like for Texas A&M, they really weren't able to have a lot of rebounding outside of Rashawn Agee. For Phillips, 4 points, 4 boards per contest last season over at Tennessee for one of the better defensive teams in all of college basketball. I do think that he's going to be able to fill a void for this team. I don't know if he's going to see like a whole bunch of production or anything like that, but certainly does fill a void, and I do think that is going to be able to help them out quite a bit moving forward. For South Florida, they are now hitting on all cylinders in the transfer portal. Mainly depth pieces is what they added here over the last 24 or so hours because they already had Chris Davis on the books, Sonny Wilson, guys like this. Now they add in there, and this is a very, very difficult name to be able to pronounce, from Stony Brook, Andre Shoskaji. He was averaging about 10.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest. The last name is quite literally spelled Shoshkikj. Shoshishki. Hopefully I got that correct, but he comes over from North Macedonia. He shot 45% from three-point range. So for Andre, he was able to do a solid job there. Should be a nice fit for this program. So I do like what they're doing on that front. And then you've got South Carolina. They had in there Camden Heidi towards the back half of the night on Wednesday. I had to post up the podcast a little bit before that became official, but that said, it's clear that South Carolina is looking to be a better three-point shooting team than they were a season ago. He began his career over at Purdue, and for Heidi last season over at Texas, he shot 45% for three, 6 points per contest. Is he going to be like a dominant, do-it-all sort of guy for this team? Heavens no, but at the same time, going to be a one-trick pony, be able to pop it and lock it from three-point range? Absolutely darn. So I like that pickup for them. And then you had a pair of pickups for Old Sam Iamford. They bring in Ty Davis from Creighton, and then they bring in, this is a really great name by the way, Win Miller. He was over at Belmont this last season. For Win Miller, was he the rambunctious scorer for the team? No, about 3 points per contest, but shot 40% for three. I think that he could be a good glue guy for the team. And then Ty Davis, he was a former top 125 recruit, just really didn't see a lot of minutes in general for this Creighton team. Being able to add someone like that, I think it's very rock solid for the Samford bunch, so that's a good one in my opinion for them. For New Mexico, they're getting a little bit more active in the transfer portal as well. They bring in a gentleman from St. John's that maybe didn't necessarily see a lot of scoring, but should be able to give them some versatility in Emran Sunjovic. Hopefully I got that correct. Comes over from Austria. He was a little bit of a redshirt last season. I do think that he's going to be able to give this team a little bit more depth, a little bit more help in general there. And then how about this team being able to go out there and add guys in the transfer portal? For Missouri, they already added Jalen Carey. Now they bring in both Bryson Chiller along with Jameer Jones. Jones is going to be able to help out a little bit more with versatility. He was a 6'6" combo player this last season over at Providence, was averaging for that team right around about 12 points per game, shot 39% from three-point range. Love his overall skill set, love his overall game. And then for Bryson Tiller, he was a part of one of the better defenses in all of college basketball. Tiller had some relatively nice versatility, only shot about 27% from three-point range, but 8 points, 6 boards, a little bit of a block per contest. It's very clear that Dennis Gates has been very much trying to just maximize low post play after in the first few years that he was over at Missouri. There wasn't necessarily a whole heck of a lot of that, but I do think that he's starting to find his sea legs now. I do think that Missouri going to continue to be able to look a little bit more down low. I think that they need a three-point shooter or two, but still, I do think that that's a step in the right direction. For Minnesota, they add in there Nolan Groves. He last season just didn't see a lot of time for Texas Tech, a point a rebound per game at 6'5". He is a native of the great state of Minnesota. I do think that this is going to be an ad where he's probably going to be a little bit more of an ancillary guy, but should see a lot more minutes than he did over at Texas Tech this last season. I think that this is going to be working out for all parties. For Memphis, they've had some ups and downs with regards to the transfer portal. They now add in their Jerry Dang, a guy that he was actually testing the NBA draft waters last year. He was only able to get out there for 8 games over at NC State this last season, was averaging about 6 points per contest for them. Last we saw him fully healthy over at Florida State 2 seasons ago. Was a 37% three-point shooter, 7 points per game, little bit of a project guy at 6'9". All sorts of athleticism, quite a bit of upside, but what you're going to be able to get is a little bit of a roll of the dice, so we're going to see what is going to be happening there. And then how about Jordan Clayton? He last season was playing playing over at Northwestern. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to UMass. This is a nice gift for them. For Clayton, he didn't necessarily put up monster numbers, 4 points and an assist and a half per contest for Northwestern, but I was a 41% three-point shooter for UMass. They really did a much better job with their three-point shooting last year than they've done in the past, so I think that he's going to be a solid fit for them. Denver England, he last season was over at Iona, 9.5 points per game. Saw a dip in his three-point shooting 2 years ago. Rice shot 38% from three, down to 30% last season, but good active hands, did a really nice job in terms of guarding the perimeter over at Iona. I think that he's going to be a good fit in that Merrimack system. I really like that Merrimack was able to identify him as being a great fit with them, so I do think that they're making great moves, and we're seeing lots of moves out there in the transfer portal, and I'm here to be taking a look at them all. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, large CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Riley Frain, who does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness, along with the Portal Report. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. When it comes to the regular season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, during the offseason, taking a look at the portal and all these moves. So I'll be back with you. Let's get them out. Thank you.